She raised the axe like it was a key the world had denied her, the blade flashing under the porch light before it came down and rang against my garage door with a sharp, metallic howl that seemed to scrape the air itself. Screws shivered, the latch buckled, and somewhere behind the stacked moving boxes in the far corner my daughter Chloe made the small, wounded sound she makes when the world gets too loud for her to bear. "Patricia, stop!" I yelled, voice cracking, palms up as if I could slow an avalanche with open hands. Laura, barefoot on the kitchen tile, gripped her phone so tightly it clicked against the counter as she told the dispatcher, "She's breaking in, our daughter is inside, she's disabled, please, hurry." Another swing landed, closer to the lock, the whole panel breathed inward with a dent like a bruise. Outside, the cul-de-sac had gathered in the hush that follows thunder, Marla clutching a clipboard near the curb, Vincent pretending not to film, a few neighbors peering through screen doors, all of them bathed in the syrupy gold of the street lamp like figures in a frozen diorama. "This is a compliance check," Patricia announced, bright vest over cardigan, white bun immaculate, eyes lit with the cold, missionary joy of someone who believes rules are the same thing as morality. "Open up or pay the fine." I could smell rain in the distance, cut grass, a hot thread of metal in the air. I could feel Chloe's fear the way you feel your own pulse. "There's a child in here," I said, stepping between the dent and the room we'd made into her quiet harbor, weighted blanket, soft lamp, lavender oil breathing slowly from the diffuser. Patricia smiled like a teacher praising a wrong answer. "Then teach her the rules," she said, and set the blade again, wedging it into the seam to lever the door wider. The camera over the driveway blinked its red dot, sirens far off began their slow, climbing stitch through the night. Laura's "please, please, please" threaded the hallway. I reached for the interior knob to the laundry, ready to move Chloe deeper into the house, but the panel groaned and surrendered another inch, a cold draft curling around my ankles as if the night itself had crept in to watch. "If you open that door," I told her, calm and clear, "you're going to regret it." She leaned her weight on the handle, savoring the power like a candy that lasts. The axe rose for one more arrogant kiss of metal. And in that suspended heartbeat, my daughter's breath hitching, my wife's voice steadying, the neighborhood holding its collective inhale, I understood that this moment wasn't a beginning but an ending coming due, the interest on a debt of small cruelties long ignored. But Patricia didn't know who she was dealing with. Let me start from the beginning. We moved into Hawthorne Court in the kind of spring that makes you believe in second chances, lawns waking up in stripes, lilacs throwing perfume over fences, kids chalking galaxies across the sidewalks while their parents traded casseroles and lawn tips in the soft evening light, and for the first time in a long while, our little trio felt like we could set our bags down inside a life that might actually fit. I set up Chloe's swing in the maple's shade before I unpacked my own toolbox, because routine was the rope that kept her steady. Breakfast at 7 when the house was quietest, meds at 8 with a squeeze of orange juice, math worksheets at 9 while her mind felt clear after the night's storms, then 10 minutes of swinging whenever the world sharpened its edges and she needed a gentler outline to press against. Laura tuned the house like a careful musician, swapping the harsh kitchen bulb for a soft, warm lamp, lining drawers so they wouldn't clatter, putting felt pads under chair legs so movement sang instead of screeched. In the garage we carved out a sanctuary that didn't look like a surrender, fresh paint the color of cream, a soft yellow reading lamp, a low shelf with sensory bins, a beanbag that held her like a small, faithful boat, the lavender diffuser whispering the same steady breath we kept whispering back to her when seizures made words feel too heavy to carry. I loved the smallness of those rituals, the way Chloe would count the birds on the fence before starting a worksheet, the way Laura would hum a half-remembered hymn while measuring flour for banana bread, the way the three of us could sit in the garage on a mild afternoon and hear the neighborhood turning its ordinary gears, sprinklers ticking, mail slots clacking, a dog thumping against a screen door because someone it loved was almost home. The cul-de-sac seemed built for exhale. Mr. Rodriguez showed me the secret to clean lawn stripes and refused to take my socket set in return. Mrs. Patterson waved from her porch swing and pressed a jar of apricot jam into Laura's hands. For new beginnings, even the teen skaters called Chloe Coach when she counted their ollies. We were trying on ordinary and finding it almost our size. I noticed the rules, sure, matching mailboxes, a single acceptable shade of beige for front doors, no flags bigger than your porch light, but they felt like the kind of harmless choreography that keeps everyone from stepping on toes. Then one afternoon the choreography introduced itself. The doorbell rang with 3 precise taps, and a woman stood framed by the dogwood, a binder hugged to her chest like a diploma. "Welcome to Hawthorne Court," she said, smile taut, white hair tucked into a bun so neat it seemed to hum. "I'm Patricia, HOA president. We pride ourselves on standards here." She paged to color-coded tabs as if unveiling a catalog: trash cans concealed, lawns maintained, garage doors closed unless you were actively entering or exiting, no unapproved signage visible from the street. Her tone had that soft steel quality of people who think kindness and control are synonyms. I nodded through it, genuinely wanting to be good neighbors, and mentioned that Chloe sometimes needed the garage open a few inches to keep the space from feeling tight on high-sensation days. Patricia's eyes flicked toward the driveway as if measuring a non-compliance that hadn't happened yet. "We always encourage families to make use of bedrooms," she said, then offered a smile that felt like a receipt. After she left, Laura and I stood in the quiet and decided to do what we'd always done: be transparent, be decent, keep receipts of our own. I emailed the management address listed on Patricia's card, attached a simple letter from Chloe's neurologist about sensory regulation, explained our routines, asked for understanding, and promised to keep the garage closed whenever possible. For a week the days returned to their good hum: swing creaking, tomatoes staked, Chloe naming the cardinal that visited our fence Professor Red, and I let myself believe that the binder lady's edges would soften once she realized our daughter was not a problem to be solved but a person to be accommodated. Then, on a cool morning so clear you could count the contrails, I found a plastic-sleeved slip tucked in our mailbox with cheerful clip art and careful bolding, and the temperature of the street dropped a degree. A friendly notice changed the air. The doorbell didn't ring so much as announce itself: 3 sharp, evenly spaced taps that made our hallway sound like a metronome for trouble, and when I opened the door, Patricia was already halfway into her practiced smile, a binder perched on her forearm like a ceremonial scepter, with Marla tucked 2 steps behind clutching a clipboard and Vincent hovering on the walk, hands laced before his name-tagged chest as if he'd been born to nod at authority. I could feel the cool breath from our partly cracked garage drifting through the house and, with it, the steady lavender pulse Chloe relied on, and I knew before she spoke that Patricia had timed her visit to make that draft a crime. "Good morning, Jake," she said, tone sugared just enough to stick in your throat. "I wish this were purely social." She clicked open the binder and revealed tabbed pages like commandments: trash receptacles, lawn height, exterior decor, and, she tapped, garage doors. "We've noticed yours is often ajar," she said. "Our covenants are clear: closed when not in active use." I started to explain, gently because I have learned that gentleness is sometimes the best shield we have, that the garage is Chloe's quiet space, that sensory regulation works better with air moving, that we monitor it constantly and keep it closed whenever possible, but Patricia's smile only held its shape, as if my words were wind moving past a statue. "I appreciate your situation," she said, "however, personal circumstances is not equal to community standards." The way she pronounced the symbol, like she was reading a poem, made Laura's hand tighten on the doorframe. "The standards exist to prevent chaos," Patricia continued, turning a page to a printed photo of our home from the sidewalk, the garage a shy inch open, the timestamp circled in highlighter. "If one family ignores them, others will follow." "We're not ignoring anything," I said, careful not to mirror her coolness into cold, "and the Fair Housing Act and ADA require reasonable accommodation." Our request went in last week with Chloe's neurologist's letter attached. I nodded at Marla, who angled her clipboard as if to shield it from contamination. Patricia's eyebrows flicked, a small salute to resistance. "Requests are reviewed at board meetings," she said. "Until then, compliance is expected." "That's not how accommodations work," Laura said, heat edging her voice despite the soft pleats she tried to fold over it. "You don't get to punish us while you consider whether our daughter is inconvenient." Vincent cleared his throat as if contribution might earn him a badge. "We're not punishing," he said, eyes fixed somewhere near my shoulder, "we're ensuring uniformity." "Uniformity isn't a virtue if it crushes people," I said, and watched Patricia weigh whether to feign empathy or double down. It didn't take long. "We have been generous," she replied, the word generous caught like a gemstone in her tone. "We documented 2 prior observations before escalating." "Observations?" I asked, but I knew: neighbors peeking from porches, phone lenses glinting like little telescopes of judgment, a spreadsheet somewhere where our address had its own tab. "I'm more than willing to meet," I added, "to walk you through our routines, to show you how the space is organized for safety." "Inspections occur with board approval," Patricia said, which answered nothing while sounding like something. Marla scribbled, mouth pinched. Behind them, the cul-de-sac hummed with the mild, guilty theater of people pretending not to eavesdrop. A mower rattled to life, then stalled, a screen door squeaked and hung half open. Mr. Rodriguez paused at his mailbox and gave me a small, apologetic shrug. Chloe coughed from down the hall, the small, shallow cough that tells me her nerves are fraying, and I saw Patricia's eyes flick past my shoulder to catch the sound the way a hawk catches sight of a mouse. "You know," she said softly, "bedrooms are more appropriate for children." Laura stepped forward, and for a second I thought the doorframe might crack under the force of her posture. "You don't get to define appropriate for our kid," she said. "Her doctor does. Her therapist does. We do." "I'm not unsympathetic," Patricia replied in the way people do when sympathy is a costume they wear to argue in public, "but rules keep property values stable, and stability benefits everyone." The words property values dropped into our foyer like a sack of wet cement. "Let me be absolutely clear," I said, because sometimes clarity is the only kindness left. "The ADA and FHA aren't suggestions. You can't rack up fines while reviewing whether my daughter deserves to breathe easier." "We'll note your position," Marla murmured, writing faster. Vincent glanced at the garage like it was a feral animal. Patricia slid a trifold form from a plastic sleeve and extended it with 2 fingers. "This is a formal warning," she said. "Further noncompliance triggers fines." I didn't take it, Laura did, because she wanted a record of everything they tried to make us swallow. "There's a board meeting next Tuesday," I said. "Put us on the agenda." Patricia's smile tilted, a small, satisfied cut. "Agendas are full for the quarter," she said. "Submit a written appeal and we'll consider it in due course." "In due course," Laura repeated, flat. "Our kids' due course is today." For the first time, Patricia's mask slipped a millimeter and I saw the thing underneath: not order, but control; not care, but contempt wearing pearls. "I'll be candid, Mr. Lawson," she said, binder closing with a quiet clap. "Hawthorne Court thrives on predictability. Families who cannot respect that may find another community better suited to their needs." The words hit like an oblique eviction. I breathed in, slow, pushed my voice through the narrow opening fury wanted to make. "We'll see you Tuesday anyway," I said, "and we'll bring the law with us." Patricia's eyes cooled a degree. "Bring whatever you like," she said, turning. "We document everything." They left as neatly as they'd arrived, 3 coordinated shadows shrinking along the walk, and for a second I let the door rest against my palm, feeling the house breathe against my skin, the way a body shudders after a near miss. Laura unfolded the warning. The language was syrupy and sharp, a smile made of razors, and at the bottom the checkbox for "Third Notice, Fines Initiated" hovered like a dare. "They're going to skip steps," she said. "They're going to make us an example." I nodded, already seeing the future glare of adhesive on our paint, already hearing the cul-de-sac's hush turn into whispers. Somewhere in the binder's shadow, I could feel the humiliation warming like a brand, bright and sticky as traffic paint, practically humming on our front door in the afternoon sun, a neon sticker incoming. It didn't crash over us all at once, it arrived like sleet, 1,000 small stings that left the skin raw. The first envelope with the HOA logo and invoice in an officious font for $50, garage visibility breach, then another for $100, unauthorized signage, because someone had leaned far enough over our side gate to photograph the little wooden plaque Laura hung by Chloe's swing that simply read, "Quiet hours 2 to 4, then a third for an invented infraction I had to read." Twice, mailbox nonconformity. Even though our mailbox matched every other soldier on the street, each bill ended with that bold sentence about liens and legal remedies like a threat whispered politely. The paper stack grew into a toppling tower on the kitchen desk, and with it came the soundscape of a neighborhood turning its head without moving its feet, the soft huddle at the mail cluster where Marla lingered with her clipboard like a village clerk, the quick glance and look away when people passed our driveway, the posts on the neighborhood page filled with toothless niceties that meant their opposites. Some folks forget rules help us all smiling face with smiling eyes, and the occasional brave message in my inbox from a quiet neighbor who wrote, "For what it's worth, I think you're right," and then added, "Please don't say I said so." I started carrying my phone like a ticket stub. Every knock might be a performance. One afternoon a white SUV with "Compliance Services" printed on the door eased to a stop in front of our house like a shark going still. Two men in tucked polos got out with measuring tapes, a clipboard, and the upbeat menace of people who enjoy finding a quarter-inch to complain about. "Routine exterior review," one said, smiling with his teeth only. I said no one would be reviewing anything that required entering our property. He gestured to the sidewalk and began photographing our eaves, our hedges, our garage door seam, the hinge on the side gate he must have memorized from Patricia's binder. A camera shutter clicked from somewhere else, Vincent, across the cul-de-sac, pretending to photograph his hydrangeas while lining us up in the viewfinder. Inside, Laura stood at the window with her hands in her sleeves like a person bracing for the first cold front, and Chloe, sensing the air's static, retreated to her beanbag with Maple's head against her ribs, both of them breathing in a rhythm that made me want to put my fists through a policy. Not everyone joined the chorus. Mrs. Patterson shuffled up our walk with a plate of lemon bars and a note that said, "If you need me to sit with her during any meetings, I can." Mr. Rodriguez showed me a cheap trick with rubber bungees to keep our trash cans from rolling during wind gusts and muttered, "They're not measuring me," which sounded less like bragging and more like guilt. And Deputy Williams, off-duty in a faded ball cap, caught me at the curb while I coiled the hose and said, "Lo, document everything, even the nothing. Bullies count on fatigue." So I set about building a ledger, dates, times, photos, a folder with subfolders, and a spreadsheet so meticulous it could have passed for a new religion. I mounted a small camera above the garage door and another angled at the side gate. Laura hated the look of surveillance on a home that had always aspired to be sanctuary, but after the third drive-by inspection, she helped me run the cable with a steadiness that said we were done mistaking politeness for safety. The footage paid dividends quickly. At 6:12 one evening, it caught Patricia craning from the sidewalk with a telephoto lens like a suburban paparazzo. At 7:43, Vincent accidentally drifting into our grass to peer down the side yard. At 3:05 the next afternoon, Marla crouched by the curb photographing the angle of our car tire relative to a chalk line no one can see unless they're hunting. When I sent stills to the management company with a note that read, "This is harassment. We request they cease," I received a reply that sounded algorithmic. "Thank you for your feedback. All compliance activity is performed according to policy." Meanwhile, the pageantry escalated. Patricia scheduled an exterior conditions walk, and arrived with 2 new polo shirts and a portable barrier they set across our driveway like they were ribbon cutting at a store that sells indignities. I stood on the porch while Maple rumbled quietly in his chest and said, "No one steps onto my property without my consent or a warrant." She smiled as if I'd brought a casserole to the wrong potluck. Refusal to cooperate will be noted. "Note this," I said, and pointed to the camera, the red eye blinking its patient metronome. "You don't get to transform my daughter's therapy into a spectacle." The break came, as breaks do, not with the most public act but with the pettiest one. A windstorm barreled down from the hills at midnight, turning the cul-de-sac into a set of hollow flutes. Sometime between the first gust and the second, our side gate banged open hard enough to slap the rosemary flat. In the morning the latch hung in 2 pieces, the screw plate sheared clean, as if someone had wrenched it to prove they could, and Chloe's swing was twisted twice around its own rope, the canvas seat pitched like a face turned away. The camera at the gate had glitched between 107 and 111, static, a smear, then darkness that wasn't quite black, which told me less about electricity and more about intent. Laura stood in the doorway in her robe, hair braided back, eyes calm in that frightening way that meant fear had exhausted itself and left resolve behind. "They touched her space," she said, and the syllables set like concrete. I spent the next hour filing reports, a police call logged and a case number assigned, an email to the management company titled "Vandalism and Tampering," immediate response requested that collected a canned acknowledgement, a message to the neighborhood page asking whether anyone's cameras caught foot traffic near our yard around 1 a.m., which earned 3 yawning gifs and 1 anonymous comment, "Maybe close your gate?" I saved even the yawns to my folder. That afternoon, while I replaced the latch with one meant for a cattle ranch, Mrs. Patterson brought hot cocoa and told Chloe about the time her son's class hamster escaped and survived a week on lettuce leaves. Mr. Rodriguez stood lookout with a rake like a halberd. Deputy Williams texted, "Call me if they come near that gate again." I tightened the last screw, wiped my hands, and looked at the tilt of our dented garage door, the scuffed concrete where Maple's paws had danced, the place where a child I love sits when the world grows teeth, and I felt the marrow deep clarity that follows a slow burn. I'm done asking nicely. The wind came first, combing the maple until its leaves hissed like quiet instructions, then the rain, a fine, needling spray that silvered the driveway and turned the street lamp halo into a blurred coin, and inside our garage sanctuary the sound softened into a steady hush that Chloe could ride like a raft after the seizure finally let go of her limbs. She was pale, eyes unfocused in that faraway way, curled in the beanbag under the weighted blanket while the lavender diffuser breathed its small, patient clouds, and I kept my voice a low shoreline as I tightened a loose bracket on the shelf just to keep my hands from shaking. Laura set the white noise app to ocean and rubbed circles between our daughter's shoulders, the kind of touch that tells the nervous system, "You are here, you are safe, you are held." The main door was closed, the side door bolted, the camera over the driveway blinking a slow red pulse. It felt, for a fragile moment, like we'd stitched the night tight enough to keep out everything that wanted to fray us. At 9:14 the motion alert chimed on my phone, a bright insect of a sound in the quiet, and the preview froze my breath. Patricia in the porch light, bun tight, high-vis vest over her cardigan like a parody of authority, Marla 2 steps behind with the clipboard, Vincent hovering, and a fourth figure, tall, contractor swagger, cradling a yellow-handled axe as if compliance required a fire line. I was at the interior door in 3 strides. "Don't move," I told Laura, which sounded absurd in a room where our whole goal was stillness. "Who is it?" Chloe murmured, the words dragging a little. "No one we let in," I said, and stepped into the hall. Through the garage door, Patricia's voice came smooth and loud, as if the rain were a microphone. "Household at 28 Hawthorne has refused inspection and is in continuing violation," she announced to the cul-de-sac like a town crier. "Board is acting under enforcement authority." I shouted back through the door's seam that no authority she owned could cross our threshold, that a disabled child was inside, that any emergency here belonged to police and medics, not a woman with a binder and a weapon. "Open voluntarily," she answered, "or fines escalate and access is compelled." The first blow landed with a metallic yelp, the door shuddered like a struck bell, the latch vibrating against its screws. Chloe flinched so hard the blanket slipped off her shoulder. Laura's phone was already in her hand. 911, she said, voice clear, "Our HOA president is attempting to break into our garage with an axe, our disabled daughter is inside, we need officers now." Another strike, closer to the lock plate. I could feel the cold creep of wet air licking the concrete as the panel flexed. Somewhere outside, a neighbor said, "Patty, this is crazy," and someone else hissed, "Do it, they can't ignore it if we show them." I grabbed the laundry room door handle, our backstage exit, and motioned to Laura. She wrapped the blanket around Chloe and guided her to her feet, humming the same low hymn she always used after seizures, that note that makes the room feel less sharp. "Keep your eyes on me, kiddo," I said, backing them toward the hallway as another blow buckled the seam with a sickening pop. The axe scraped now, not just struck, Patricia levering the blade to pry instead of only batter, a kind of greedy patience. "You're on camera," I called, heart punching my ribs. "You're committing a crime." "I'm preventing one," she replied, and I could see her in my head smiling that martyr's smile as she said it, the kind that turns harm into virtue because it wears a lanyard. The siren thread found the night at last, far off at first, then building, stitching rain and asphalt together. "Officers are en route," the dispatcher said in Laura's speaker, calm as a lighthouse. "Stay inside. Do not engage." The panel finally yielded a jagged hand's-width gap, not enough for a person, just enough for the weather to shove its cold face inside and for Patricia to peer with the hungry satisfaction of someone who believes a hinge is a moral victory. I stepped into that thin mouth of air, body blocking her view of the lamp and the quilt and the child we'd already moved, the sacred little geography she would have treated like inventory. "One more inch," I said, steady, "and you answer to the law, not your board." The contractor reached for the seam with a gloved hand. I planted my palm over the gap and met his eyes through the wet dark. "Back away," I told him, and for a second he did, because there's a voltage in a father's voice when the house is under siege. Rain drummed harder. Maple barked from the hallway, low and furious, the sound of a line drawn. Red and blue finally smeared the end of the block and grew into shape. Patricia hesitated, then heaved the axe again as if the arrival of witnesses were the point, not the deterrent. The blade kissed metal. The world narrowed to the bright ring of impact and the fact that our daughter, our brave, exhausted girl, was 2 rooms away trying to slow her breath while a stranger tried to turn her sanctuary into a spectacle. The sirens bloomed full at the curb. A command voice cut the night, "Ma'am, put down the axe." Patricia froze, face twisting like someone who'd been interrupted mid-sermon. I felt the swing in me then, not of steel, but of decision, old and simple as bone, enough. I looked back at Laura, at the corridor holding our family like a throat holds a shout, and I knew a hinge had turned inside me too. The cameras read. I blinked. The rain hissed. The door groaned its wounded animal sound. And in that wet, electric second when the threshold held and the patrol boots hit our driveway, I made a promise out loud, not for drama but for truth, a vow hammered to the same studs as our home. That was the moment I swore I'd make her pay. Deputy Williams' report number sat at the top of my notes like a spine, and from it I started building a body, dates, times, screenshots, printed emails, every orange sticker flattened and taped to paper like dead wasps, because he'd said bullies count on fatigue and I refused to give them mine. I wanted a paper mountain so tall even Patricia's binder would look like a pamphlet at its base. I exported our driveway and side gate camera clips, labeled each with minute marks, pulled stills of the axe raised and the contractor's gloved hand probing the seam, and stapled them to a chronology Laura drafted with the calm ferocity of a librarian in a storm. For 12th, first friendly notice. April 18th, formal accommodation request sent with neurologist letter. May 2nd, emergency inspection attempted. May 19th, gate latch found broken. May 23rd, axe incident. Then I requested the HOA's meeting minutes through the management company, which tried to stall with processing time, and I replied, 10 business days per statute, timer running, CCNG Deputy Williams and, for good measure, the county ADA coordinator. At night, after Chloe slept and Maple collapsed like a warm sandbag across her feet, Laura and I sat at the dining table, the good one we'd meant to save for holidays, and turned it into a command center, a stack for invoices, a stack for correspondence, a stack labeled witnesses, where Mrs. Patterson's neat cursive lived beside Mr. Rodriguez's block letters and 2 teenagers' guilty penitent DMs. We recorded her with the axe, we're sorry we laughed, now screen captured, printed, and signed with their first names because courage starts small. I called the Epilepsy Foundation's helpline and they pointed me to an attorney who didn't treat accommodations like charity but as the law's bright line. Elise Kaplan met us on a Tuesday in an office that smelled faintly of lemon oil and printer toner, her hair pulled back, her voice the kind that makes panic remember its manners. "Tell me everything in order," she said, and when we did, She didn't interrupt to gasp at the axe or cluck at the fines. She wrote ADA, FHA, and interactive process on a legal pad and circled them as if building a map. They had a duty to engage, not punish, she said. You provided medical verification. They responded with escalations, inspections, and a physical breach attempt. That's discrimination and retaliation under the Fair Housing Act, and denial of a reasonable modification under the ADA. Also, she tapped the pad, the axe is its own storm cloud. Elise sent record requests the same afternoon, including one for prior complaints against Patricia at any HOA she'd served. She subpoenaed the management company for internal emails that mentioned our address, and when their lawyer huffed about privilege, she smiled like a person measuring wood that will soon be cut and said, "Produce the log." While we waited, she coached us on tone. Do not answer in anger. Do not avoid answering. Respond in writing, attach your prior evidence, and end with a clear ask. We did, and the replies we got from the board were textbook. Vincent's mechanical, your concerns are noted. Marla's politely barbed, we appreciate families with special needs but must maintain standards. And Patricia's masterpiece of projection, a letter suggesting our cameras were creating a surveillance environment unbecoming to community spirit. When the minutes finally arrived, the pages read like a play where everyone forgot the audience could see them. Motion to accelerate fines for repeated garage infractions, passed 3-0, tabled, accommodation request from 28 Hawthorne, insufficient time to review, discussion, risks of creating precedents. Elise highlighted, accelerate fines, and tabled, then slid the packet back to me. They wrote your case for you. The record search paid off, too. A small claims judgment from Patricia's previous HOA for entering a patio to measure a non-compliant screen without permission, dismissed with prejudice after damages paid, an email chain where she mused that exceptions open the door to murals and chickens, a complaint about selective enforcement that ended in a quiet board censure. Pattern, Elise said, and laid the papers like tiles. We gathered witness statements formally. Mrs. Patterson wrote about a child who needs a quieter room than most houses can offer, and ended with, accommodation is not indulgence, it is neighborliness codified. Mr. Rodriguez described catching Patricia leaning over our fence, phone out, like paparazzi for trash cans. The teen signed a short affidavit attesting to the acts, the contractor, the words, enforcement authority. Their video attached as Exhibit G. Elise drafted a demand letter that sang in 2 keys. Calm law and sharpened consequence, cease harassment, rescind all fines, approve the accommodation as requested, implement ADA/FHA training for board members, issue a written apology, and preserve all ESI, electronically stored information, relevant to our address. Failure to comply would result in a civil action under the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act seeking injunctive relief, damages, and attorney's fees, and a referral to the district attorney. Regarding the unlawful entry attempt, the management company replied with bureaucratic moose, the board appreciates your perspective and will review next quarter, and Patricia, unable to help herself, posted an emergency community standards meeting notice on the neighborhood page that read like a rally, which Elise printed and labeled retaliatory messaging. That night Laura slid the signed demand letter into an envelope like she was putting a photograph away, kissed Chloe's hair, and said, "We're doing this right." The district attorney's office called the next morning to confirm charges would be filed for attempted break-in and criminal mischief. Deputy Williams texted, "Movement coming." Elise filed our civil complaint the same day, e-stamped and numbered, our evidence stitched to it like armor, emails, minutes, invoices, stills, video links, witness statements, medical letter, and the photo of the dented door that made my throat ache every time I looked at it. When the case number pinged my phone, I read it out loud to Laura at the sink, maple light slanting across the counter, the dog's nails ticking the tile, and felt, not triumph, not yet, but alignment, like the house itself was standing a little straighter. The management company's tone changed within hours. We are committed to working collaboratively, but Patricia doubled down with a new violation for our unapproved security cameras, which Elise answered with a single line, retaliation noted, added to prayer for relief. I slid the thick stack of pleadings into a binder of our own and wrote in black marker across the spine, not her name but our purpose, CHLOE, accommodation. Then the clerk's email arrived with the date and courtroom. I forwarded it to Elise, to Williams, to Laura, then stood in the doorway of the quiet room and watched the diffuser's soft breath, the lamp's small halo, the swing's gentle arc, and knew there was nothing left to negotiate, only to prove. Court date set. No turning back. The county courthouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, and as we filed into Department 3, with Laura's hand tight in mine and Elisa's legal pad tucked under her arm like a blade disguised as stationery, I felt that careful silence courthouses keep, the kind that makes even footsteps sound like decisions. Half of Hawthorne Court had migrated to the benches, Marla stiff as her clipboard, Vincent wearing his retired name tag like a relic, neighbors stacked in nervous rows, and Patricia entering last in a tailored suit and the same small, reigning smile, as if she'd come to host rather than answer. The criminal calendar came first, the state versus Patricia Hargrove, and the prosecutor, a woman with a steady soprano and an index finger that never wavered, plugged in our driveway footage so the room could watch the night breathe again, rain blanching the lens, Patricia in a high-vis vest, the contractor's yellow-handled axe rising, my voice on the audio saying, "There's a child in here," and the blade striking metal with that bright, indecent ring. "Miss Hargrove," the prosecutor asked when the screen froze on the axe mid-arc, "why an axe?" and Patricia lifted her chin to deliver the line she'd practiced, "Emergency access for community enforcement," which sounded less like an answer and more like a permission slip she'd written for herself. The judge, a calm man with a pencil he tapped once before speaking, leaned in just enough to make the room lean with him. "HOA covenants are not search warrants," he said, voice unhurried, "and forced entry is not a compliance tool," and in the benches I heard something subtle and seismic, a communal exhale, a nail sliding out of an old board. The court found probable cause to bind the unlawful entry and criminal mischief counts over for trial, and as the clerk marked the date, Patricia's mouth tightened to a white seam that even her suit couldn't iron smooth. Then Elise stood for our civil case, Lawson versus Hawthorne Court HOA, and the air changed temperature, because her way with facts is like a carpenter's with a square. She laid ADA and Fair Housing Act on the ledge first, explained reasonable accommodation, and the duty to engage in an interactive process with the same gentle firmness Laura uses to guide Chloe's breath back from a storm, and then threaded our evidence through those beams. The medical letter attached to our first email, the minutes where our request was tabled while accelerating fines, passed 3-0, the inspection photos of a beanbag in a lamp treated like contraband, the orange stickers lined up like hazard tape, the gate latch broken and the camera glitch bracketed by footprints, finally the axe night itself, each item labeled and dated until even the benches would felt annotated. The management company's representative tried to sand the edges, miscommunications, high volume of requests, commitment to standards, but Elise only asked him to read the lines he'd rather summarize, and his voice faltered at "accelerate fines" and "insufficient time to review." She called Mrs. Patterson, who told the court in thread-thin but iron words what it means when a child needs a room softer than the world, and Mr. Rodriguez, who testified to catching Patricia leaning over our fence with her phone like paparazzi for trash cans, and even one of the teenage skaters, cheeks pink, who said he'd filmed The Lady with the Axe and hadn't slept right since. When Patricia took the stand, Elise did not raise her voice, she simply set the board minutes beside the demand letter beside the footage and asked, "Where in your bylaws is forced entry authorized, and what step of the interactive process allows punitive fines before review?" And again, clean as a bell, "Why an axe?" And Patricia tried to turn the room into a cul-de-sac meeting, property values, precedent, uniformity, until the judge lifted a palm and said, "Ma'am, answer the question asked," and for one heartbeat I saw the scaffolding of her certainty groan. I spoke last, not about policy but about Chloe, about the quiet room that lets her nervous system unclench, about how the door dents when steel meets zealotry and how a child hears that dent with her whole body. Laura followed with the single sentence that made the stenographer glance up, "When the axe hit the door, our daughter cried," and then the judge set his pencil down and read findings that felt like the house standing itself back up. That the HOA discriminated under the FHA by failing to accommodate and retaliated by escalating enforcement, that it violated the ADA by refusing to engage in the process and by harassing during consideration, that Ms. Hargrove, acting under color of HOA authority, attempted unlawful entry using a dangerous implement. He ordered immediate approval of our accommodation and any functionally equivalent use of the garage as therapeutic space, rescission of all fines and fees with interest, mandatory ADA/fair housing training for board members within 60 days, written policy revisions prohibiting retaliatory enforcement, and an injunction enjoining further harassment or unauthorized inspections. He awarded damages for distress and attorney's fees, and as the numbers hit the record I felt something unclench in my ribs I hadn't known was clenched that tight. Patricia's counsel asked for a stay, the judge denied it with a small, final shake of the head. He added, almost gently, that the criminal charges would proceed on their own track. And that, community is not obtained by coercion, but by accommodation. The gavel didn't slam, it breathed, and yet the sound rippled through the benches like a shockwave. Elise squeezed my shoulder once, a shorthand for, we did it, and Laura's hand finally loosened, and for a blink the room was only light on polished wood and the thin whir of the ventilation and the sense that a weight had slid off the joists of our lives. Outside, on the courthouse steps, neighbors stood in a loose, embarrassed constellation, some approaching with hesitant apologies, some already on their phones, and Patricia paused at the bottom stair as if waiting for applause that wasn't coming. Deputy Williams grinned without teeth and said to me, Paper Mountain worked, and Maple, who'd waited in the car with Chloe and Mrs. Patterson, thumped his tail in time with her laugh when we told her we could hang the swing without a clock watching. Back on Hawthorne Court, blinds would tilt, threads would fray, a special meeting notice would go up in place of a rallying cry, and the orange stickers would curl in trash bins like shed skins. You could feel it in the way silence changed pitch, neighbors exhale, regime cracks. 2 months later, Hawthorne Court looks the same from a passing car, lawns combed in bright stripes, porches neat as postcards, kids chalking constellations on the sidewalk, but up close the air is different, looser, as if someone finally cracked a window in a stuffy room. The board voted Patricia out at a special meeting that felt more like a sigh than a spectacle, and the new president, Denise, a middle school teacher with dry humor and patient eyes, opened her first agenda with coffee, donuts, and a single sentence that reset the whole street: we're going to learn how to be neighbors again. Our accommodation went from contested to codified. The garage quiet room is written into policy now, not as a grudging exception but as a shared promise, and the orange stickers that once shouted on our door live only as curled scraps in a file we keep for memory, not for war. The door itself remains dented. I could have replaced the panel, but the crease has become a kind of page we reread when doubt creeps in, a reminder that a boundary held because we did. Maple has decided the beanbag is also his territory. He curls there during Chloe's swing time and matches her breathing until her shoulders drop, until the lavender diffuser's soft rhythm becomes the house's pulse again. Neighbors who once watched from behind blinds now wave from driveways. Mr. Rodriguez helped me rebuild the side gate, and the teens who filmed the Axe Night mow Mrs. Patterson's lawn on Saturdays. Penance turned into habit. Even Vincent stopped by with a store-bought pie and a halting apology about getting caught up, and Laura, who understands the fragile math of community, thanked him so he'd try again. Denise's training brought a slow, careful culture shift. Instead of violation, we hear conversation. Instead of patrols, we see check-ins. Instead of fines, we're asked, what do you need? Sometimes after dinner, Chloe rides her swing while the dusk turns the maple into a dark lace against a sky the color of cooled steel, and Laura hums on the step and I fix a loose hinge or coil the hose. Ordinary chores finally allowed to be ordinary. When the wind catches the dented panel, it sings a faint tin note, and I don't flinch. I think about the judge's words, the Paper Mountain, the day we chose process over rage and still found our way to justice. I think about how a quiet room is not a luxury, it's a doorway back to yourself. And I think about the line we ended up teaching our street, simple, stubborn, older than any bylaw, that the rules that matter are the ones that keep people safe, especially the small and the different and the fragile. Evil tried to break us, but it only made us stronger.